Hello everyone, welcome to the 100 subscriber Plush Collection. I've been planning to do this video for a while, but after I realized I was super close to 100 subs, I was like, yeah, it's just gonna be the 100 subscriber special. And well, here we are. Didn't think I'd come this far in a little over a year, but look at that. Anyways, we're gonna start with what is easily gonna be the biggest collection in this video, Mario collection. Starting with the Mario Heroes, here is Mario himself. Here is Baby Mario. Here is Movie Mario. Here is Metal Mario. Dr. Mario. Probably gonna use this guy in a video at some point. Here is Fire Mario. And Cat Mario. Here is Luigi. Here is Baby Luigi. And here is the giant Mario movie Luigi. Moving on to the princesses, we have Princess Peach, as well as Baby Peach. Here is Daisy. Here is a bootleg Rosalina. Hopefully I can get the official someday. This one's not terrible though. And here's Pauline. Moving on to the Yoshis, we have Yoshi himself. Here's Red Yoshi, Orange Yoshi, here is Blue Yoshi, Black Yoshi, and finally, my favorite Yoshi, Purple Yoshi. Here is Wario, and you can't have him without Waluigi. Oh crap, forgot a Yoshi, here's a light blue Yoshi. Here is Donkey Kong, and you can't have him without his best pal Diddy Kong. And lastly, the miscellaneous heroes being Toad, Poochie, very cute plush. Here is Lumily, what I'm pretty sure is one of like the only customs in this collection. Here is Nabbit. The last one in this, I'm not sure if it's really a hero or a villain, just including it here. Here is the Fire Flower. And that does it for the Mario heroes. Now on to the villains. Fire Flower. And obviously we gotta start the villains off with Bowser. Then we have easily my favorite Mario plush in this collection, Dry Bowser. Here is Bowser Jr. Here is a Dry Bowser Jr. I don't know why I even have this thing. Moving on to the Koopaling, starting with easily the best Koopaling, Ludwig. And here is Lemmy. Here's Roy. Here's Iggy. Wendy, worst Koopaling. Morton. No. And Larry. Moving on to Bowser's Army, we have Goomba. Here's Koopa Troopa. Here is Koopa Paratroopa. Here is Dry Bones. Love this guy. Here is Hammer Bro. Lakitu. It is not Lakitu. Here is this Thwomp Pillow. Here is Cheep Cheep. Here is Shy Guy. Here is Wiggler. Love this guy. Here is Chain Chomp. Here is the blooper. The worst item in Mario Kart history. You can still perfectly see this item sucks. Here we have where is he? Boo. Here is Bullet Bill with a mutilated arm. Here is Piranha Plant. Here we got Petey Piranha. Here we have the Bob-omb. King Bob-omb. And lastly, my favorite Mario character ever, Kamek. And that does it for the Mario villains and just the Mario collection in general. Now it is time to move on to Pokemon. Starting with Pokemon, here is Pikachu. And Jigglypuff, because it's good to have both of the ones from Smash 64. Moving on to the OG3 starters, here's Squirtle. Here's Bulbasaur. And Charmander. And also, here is Charizard. We're just going to be going in random order with these. Here is Panjam. Here is Turtwig. Here is Piplup. Here is Snorlax. Here is Trico. Here is Litten. Here is Incineroar with a posable tail. And finally, my favorite Pokemon, Greninja. And that does it for the Pokemon collection. Now on to Kirby. Okay, so near the end of filming this video, I got this guy. An actual official Charizard. From now on, this is going to be the Charizard I use on the channel, not the old one. So, yeah. Starting with the Kirby collection, here is Kirby himself. Love this guy. Here is the most adorable plushie in this entire collection, Sleeping Kirby. I love this thing so much. Here is King Dedede, the best Kirby character. Meta Knight. Here is Waddle Dee, and you can't have him without Waddle Doo. Here is Rick, as well as Coo. Hopefully one day I can get my hands on Kine. And finally, here is PBJ, aka Poppy Pros Jr. And that does it for the Kirby collection. Now it is time to move on to the rest of the Nintendo collections. We shall be starting with the Zelda section here. Here's Link, as well as Zelda. Here is Toon Link, and also Toon Zelda. I don't really know if this is ever going to be used in a video. It might, but it likely won't. This last one isn't really a plush, but I don't really care. Here's Ganondorf. This collection is never going to update. This Zelda one here, yeah, probably never going to update. Anyways, moving on to the Pikmin section. Here is Olimar. Here is Louie. And finally, this hilarious looking plush of Ochi. On to Splatoon, here is Inkling Girl and Callie. On Fire Emblem, here's Marth and Ike. I might get Roy, but other than that, this collection probably also won't ever update. Moving on to Animal Crossing, here's Tom Nook. And the noisiest plush ever made, Isabelle. See, so noisy. And here's Fox, from Star Fox, obviously. This one probably also won't update unless I get Falco, but I likely won't. Yeah. And that does it for the Nintendo plushies. Now on to Sonic. Starting with the Sonic collection is the new Sonic of the channel, the GE Classic Sonic. I'm sure you all remember the Kid Robot Sonic, but I've changed. Speaking of which, here's the Kid Robot Sonic. Here is what is going to be the regular Classic Sonic. He has a pancake head. Here is the Sonic movie Sonic, as well as the Sonic movie Baby Sonic. Here's Super Sonic. And lastly for the Sonics, Classic Super Sonic. Moving on to Tails, here's the Kid Robot Tails plush. Here's Classic Tails with a very strange looking tail. And Sonic movie Tails with an overgrown ear. Here is the GE Classic Knuckles. Here is Kid Robot Knuckles. Here is what's going to be the actual Classic Knuckles. And movie Knuckles. Before we move on to Shadow, I'm going to say something real quick. I do not have an Amy plush. I plan to get her eventually, but for now, I don't know when, but it'll happen eventually. Yeah. But anyways, here is Shadow. Here is Pancake Head Shadow. This is probably just going to become Classic Shadow, I guess. I don't really know. Here is the Sonic movie Shadow. All three of the Shadows are going to be appearing in a video on my second channel, Super Plush Bros, which you should totally go subscribe to, link in the description. Here's Super Shadow. Here's Silver. Blaze. Here is a giant creamed rabbit custom I got off Etsy. Here is Cheese the Chow. Here is a neutral chow. Dark chow. Here is Vector the crocodile. Here is SPO. Charmy. Here is both Mighty and Ray. Finally, for the heroes, here's a very deranged looking Jet the Hawk plush. Next up are the only Sonic villains I have, being Eggman, Metal Sonic, and finally, Infinite. And that does it for the Sonic collection. Now on to just other big video game franchises. Alright, starting with the other franchises that don't have a big enough collection to be on their own. Final Fantasy. Cloud Strife himself, the main guy of the channel. And also, Sephiroth. This guy will be very important later in the channel, so you'll just have to wait and see. Here's someone y'all probably didn't know I even had. Pac-Man. I don't know if I'm ever going to use this guy, it's just kind of cool to have. Here is Joker from Persona 5. Here is Ryu, the only Street Fighter character I will ever own. And another Capcom franchise, Mega Man. And Zero. And finally, the Microsoft ones, being Banjo and Kazooie, Steve, and Jack Black. That's it, Steve! And that does it for the other big video game franchises. Now on to the indie games. Alright, moving on to the indie games, we'll be starting with Cuphead. Speaking of which, here's Cuphead. Here's Mugman. Here's Puphead. Cagney Carnation, the best Cuphead character, in my opinion. Here's Elder Kettle. Here's Beppy the Clown. And lastly, the Devil. Moving on to Undertale, I only have two, being Sans and Papyrus. And last for this section is Friday Night Funkin', starting with Boyfriend, Girlfriend. Here's Sarvente from Mid-Fight Masses. And here's Zardy, but he's going to be used like his in-game version, like from Zardy's Maze, not as a Friday Night Funkin' character. I'm just including him with this because he's heavily associated with that game. And that does it for the regular indie games. Now on to the indie horror games, starting with FNaF. Almost forgot about a Cuphead character. Here's Miss Chalice. Starting off the indie horror franchises, we have Five Nights at Freddy's, with Freddy Fazbear himself, one of the main mascots of the channel. Then we have Bonnie, the best FNaF 1 character. Here is Chica, as well as a food poison Mr. Cupcake. I'm not getting the real Mr. Cupcake because why is it $100 for a cupcake? Anyways, here's Foxy. And Golden Freddy. Moving on to the FNaF 2 characters, we have the best FNaF character ever created, the Puppet. As well as a pre-mangle, I don't really know what to call this thing. Here is Springtrap. The only FNaF 3 character I'm ever gonna own, aside from like maybe Spring Bonnie and Fredbear. But like, this is a bootleg, but it looks fine. I'm keeping him. Yeah. The only FNaF 4 character in this collection, Jacko Bonnie. As for sister location, we have Funtime Freddy and Bon Bon! Okay, see, I pulled a Gabe's World there. But we also have the actual Funtime Foxy. You aren't Funtime Foxy, whatever you are. You're Toy Foxy. Yeah. Here is El Chip, the only FNaF 6 character in this collection. Moving on to Help Wanted, we have Dreadbear, Grim Foxy, and Captain Foxy. On to FNaF AR, we have VR Toy Freddy, System Error Toy Bonnie, High Score Toy Chica, Radioactive Foxy, Live Wire Toy Freddy. Here's Shamrock Freddy. Here is Firework Freddy. And lastly, for the AR characters, Liberty Chica. As for Security Breach, we have Glamrock Freddy. Here's Monty. Glamrock Chica. Roxy. Here we have Vanny, which is ugly. Here's both Sun and Moon, two of the best FNaF plushies ever made. We also have the Eclipse versions of Sun and Moon. And also, here's Glamrock Bonnie. Next up is the Fanverse characters, being Candy, Popgoes, and Blake. Now we're finally on to the miscellaneous FNaF characters, being Balloon Freddy and also Balloon Chica. Here's Tie-Dye Bonnie. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to pan this back to like the end of the room, whatever. Here is Spring Colorway Foxy. Here's Neon Foxy, I guess, but basically Neonite. Here's a giant elf Bonnie. Here's a sun-moon combination thing. This could have gone with the Security Breach characters, but nah. And the final plush of the FNaF collection. Here is Funko the Good from Makeship. And that finally does it for the FNaF collection. Oh my gosh. This might be bigger than the Mario one. But now it's just time for the other indie horror franchises. Moving on to other indie horror franchises, starting with Bendy and the Ink Machine. Here is, well, Bendy himself. Oh, hi, new cat. Here is Sammy Lawrence, the last Bendy plush in this collection. Next up is a franchise that will definitely end up with its own collection at some point in the future. Poppy Playtime. Here is, well, Huggy Wuggy. Here is Catnap. Here is another Catnap. Here is Dog Day. Crafty Corn. Here is Hoppy Hopscotch with posable ears. Here's Bobby Bear Hug. Here's Bubba Bubbaphant. And lastly, for Poppy Playtime, here is Doughy. I feel like I'm gonna get like flamed for this next franchise, but I like Garden of Banban. I think it's funny. Anyways, here's Banban. Here's Jumbo Josh. I'm Jumbo Josh, bro. And here's Nab Nab. Yeah. That does it for the indie horror franchises. Now on to Roblox Horror. Moving on to Roblox Horror, starting with Rainbow Friends. Here is Red. Here is Blue. Here's Green. Here's Orange. Yellow. Cyan. This giant bootleg purple. This thing. This other thing. And that thing. Now, moving on to the Roblox horror game that, well, Rainbow Friends is good. No Roblox game will ever be able to top Doors. Here is the figure. And as of now, the only other Doors plush I have is Seek. And that does it for the Roblox horror section. Now on to the mobile games. Okay, this one isn't really a mobile game. I don't know where else to include this. Among Us. Here's this blue toilet paper crewmate guy. Here is this yellow leaf crewmate guy. And this little orange crewmate guy. He squeaks. Moving on to the actual mobile games. Angry Birds. Here's Red. Here's Chuck. Bomb. Blue. Hal. Space Chuck. King Pig. A regular pig. He's big. And then the crown of the collection. The Mighty Eagle. And lastly for this section is Plants vs. Zombies, or just zombies because that's all I have. Here's Coney. Here's this wizard zombie. His name is going to be Ozzy. If you get both references there, you're pretty darn smart. Here is this basketball zombie. I don't really know what I'm going to name him yet. And lastly, Michael. And that does it for the mobile games plus Among Us. Now, on to the miscellaneous. We are now about to begin what is going to be easily the biggest part of this entire collection, the miscellaneous, but I'll start with the very last video game character. Here's Sora from Kingdom Hearts. Here is Mickey. And we also have Steamboat Willie. Here is Donald. Here is the very tall Goofy plush. Here is a Safari Goofy. Here is both Chip and Dale. Here is Kermit the Frog. Here's Jack Skellington. Oh, I'm here. Yes. Here's Oogie Boogie. Here's Winnie the Pooh. And also Eeyore. Here's Woody. Here is Remy from Ratatouille. Here's Wally. Here is Spider-Man. Here's Rocket Raccoon. You can't have Rocket without Groot. And also, here's Cosmo. Here's Darth Vader. Here's Homer Simpson. And the one and only Stewie Griffin. Here's Sully. Almost forgot about this guy. Oh yeah, it's me, Donkey the Shrek. Let's go. Here's the Grinch. Here's Garfield. Here's SpongeBob. Here's this other SpongeBob doing like a thumbs up. I don't really know. Here's the one and only Tuxedo Pants. Hey. Here's Muscle Bob. Here's Patrick Star. Here's Squidward. Love this guy. Here's Mr. Krabs. Money! Here's Plankton. Here's Cell from Dragon Ball Z. I'll hopefully use this guy in a video someday. Here's Xanta from Ed's World. Here's Jack's Digital Circus. And here's the Triangle Guard from Squid Game. Moving on to the puppets, we have the King himself. Brooklyn guy. And this guy. I don't really know what I'm gonna name him. Here is Mr. Turtle. This guy will eventually be used in a video. I love this guy so much. Here's this random Squishmallow. Yeah. Moving on to the final two plushies of the collection. Here is the one and only Duck from the Duck Song. Very old piece of YouTube history. And the final plush of the collection. Let's go gambling! Almost forgot about one. There's that chicken thing back there. And that does it for the 2025 plush collection. Probably do another one of these next year, but I don't know. Okay, so I did forget about one. Here's the Time Wizard. Yeah. Never thought I'd actually be able to get to 100 subs and also make this video, but would you look at that. Again, thanks for 100 subs, and go subscribe to this channel and my second channel, Super Plush Bros. I have new videos coming out there at some point, but I don't know when. Yep, that's gonna do it for today's video.